You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and there's only one thing to talk about today. The first round of the 2020 NFL Draft is in the books. Very exciting draft. Some players were taken that I definitely don't think should have gone in the first round. Some perfect fits along with some egregious reaches. I'm going to break it all down. But first, I want to comment on the draft itself and the presentation of it. Obviously, this was a new experience for everyone. From Trey Wingo to Roger Goodell to Mel Kiper. I was watching the ESPN feed. I don't know what was happening on ABC. I never turned on ABC once last night. I know that the NFL Network was simulcasting what ESPN was showing. I thought it was very interesting that they had the three ESPN personalities with the three NFL Network personalities. I thought that was very well done. I liked that they had Kurt Warner for the quarterbacks and Michael Irvin for the wide receivers. I hope that's something that will continue on tonight and tomorrow. I'm sure that ESPN would have loved to have had Todd McShay as part of their coverage, but obviously he was diagnosed with the coronavirus. Thoughts and prayers are with him. Were there some technical hiccups? Absolutely. But that was to be expected. Like, the worst thing that really could have happened was that Team X picked player Y when they meant to pick player Z. We didn't get any reports of that. I thought it was kind of funny that Commissioner Goodell was in a sports jacket and a collared shirt midway through the draft, and then he changed into a sweater, did his best Mr. Rogers impression. I mean, you're the commissioner of the NFL during the first round of the 2020 NFL Draft. I understand you're at home, but put on a suit. It doesn't have to be the nicest suit in the world. It doesn't need to be a Brooks Brothers tailored suit, but come on. Put on a suit. Look, obviously there were some technical hiccups from the ESPN end. Wingo was calling on people who didn't respond, and there was a package that Wingo called for, and it wasn't played, then it was played. It was weird, and obviously Goodell messed up some names. He egregiously messed up the 2022 NFL Draft announcement. I had no idea what he meant until Adam Schefter tweeted it. Thank God for Shefty. But that would have happened anyway. All in all, this was a great job by everyone involved. Give everyone involved credit, from the IT people to the camera people to the presenters, to everyone in between. Give them a ton of credit. If I'm giving them a letter grade, they get a solid A-. Okay, on to the actual picks. I'm gonna rapid fire through the first three because those were basically locks. Joe Burrow had arguably the best season in college football history. He was the slam dunk first overall pick, especially given Tua's injury. In fact, there were some people that even if Tua didn't get hurt, would have had Burrow ahead of Tua, given the year he had. He's going to lead the Bengals into a new era. I'm very optimistic as to their future. The one thing I'll say is I saw a report that Burrow and Dalton are going to be competing for the starting spot. Firstly, I think Dalton's going to be off the team come opening day. Secondly, Joe Burrow is NFL ready. Joe Burrow just put together one of the best seasons in college football history, and you're going to have him wait? You're going to have him sit behind Andy Dalton? Well, wait a minute. If you're that convinced that Dalton can still start, then why did you take Burrow? Joe Burrow is going to start week 1. That headline was nonsense. It was undoubtedly the right decision to take Burrow. He's going to be their starter week 1. I don't think there's a question about it. Chase Young is going to continue the legacy of OSU defensive players dominating in the NFL with the Bosas and a whole host of other people. I mean, this kid is probably the perfect edge rushing prospect. Yeah, he disappeared the last few games this season, but he was hurt. And, you know, he had his eyes on the prize. He knew he was going to be a big pick in the NFL draft regardless of what he did. So, he was probably dogging it a little bit. But you know what? Now that he's a Washington Redskin, now that he was picked with the second overall pick, it's showtime. And him and Montez Sweat in a Ron Rivera defense, that's scary. And with Dwayne Haskins and Terry McLaurin leading the offense, the future is bright in DC. One thing I do want to say is something that I heard on the ESPN broadcast. I think it was Mel Kiper who said that if Young had dominated those last 3 games, he would have been the first overall pick, or maybe would have been the first overall pick. I don't think that's the case. I don't think this is a situation like last year. See, last year, if Nick Bosa had stayed healthy, he would have been the first overall pick. But that was partially because the Cardinals had just spent a first-round pick on Josh Rosen. So, how can you justify taking another quarterback when you have this lock, stock, and barrel generational talent sitting there? The Bengals don't have that. The Bengals took Andy Dalton in the second round in 2011 and spent a 6th-round pick on Ryan Finley. They didn't have any big investments in quarterback. Look, Dalton has had a solid career. Nothing spectacular. Hall of very good would be pushing it. But certainly nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, definitely nothing that would prevent the Bengals from taking Burrow. Mike Brown is a very loyal guy. It took him a long time to move on from Marvin Lewis. He's still holding on to AJ Green. I want to work for him. He's the kind of boss I want to work for. A very loyal person. But Burrow was the slam dunk first overall pick. They needed a quarterback. They needed to move on from Dalton. It was time. The notion that if Young had dominated those final 3 games, he'd have pushed Burrow for the first overall spot, I don't see it. Jeff Okudah is probably the best cornerback prospect we've had in a really long time. You want to tell me he's a bad tackler? You certainly can. But, man, I'll tell you, this guy reminds me so much of Marshawn Lattimore, it's not even funny. I think he's going to be a fantastic player in the NFL for years and years to come. And he fits the Lions perfectly since they traded Darius Slay to the Eagles. Match made in heaven. Those first 3 picks get easy A+ grades. There was one thing that I saw, though, about the Lions. They should have traded down because they could have gotten something, anything, from a quarterback-needy team. This was from Walter Cherepinski of WalterFootball.com, who I do like. But he's so off base here, it's not even funny. First up, what makes you think that a quarterback-needy team was interested in trading up to 3? Maybe they knew that there was no serious interest in that pick. The reports that came out afterwards were that there were no serious talks for the 3rd or 4th overall pick. You can't begrudge the Lions for not trading down. That's ridiculous. Look, I don't like Bob Quinn either, but he made the right pick. And you're making a big assumption that they could have traded down. It takes 2 to tango, buddy. That's one of the dumbest things I've ever read in my life. So now we move on to the 4th overall pick, the New York Giants. And you can always count on Dave Gettleman to throw a curveball. You'd be hard-pressed to find a single person who had Andrew Thomas as the best offensive tackle in this draft. Early on, was that the consensus? Yes. But he slipped on a lot of people's boards. I had him as the 4th best offensive tackle. I had him as the 14th best prospect in this draft. Look, by the time the Giants were on the clock, the consensus was that they were going to take an offensive tackle. Very few people still had them taking Isaiah Simmons. They were going to give Daniel Jones some help. And I don't begrudge them for taking an offensive tackle. They just took the wrong one. Now, it's nothing against Thomas. Andrew Thomas, I think, has a really, really high floor. He's a very safe pick. He's going to be a New York Giant for the next 10 to 15 years. But he has really a medium ceiling. See, this is a GM who has taken risks all throughout his time with the Giants. Taking Saquon Barkley was a big gamble on Eli Manning. Drafting Daniel Jones, huge gamble. Trading for Leonard Williams, huge risk. Now you're taking the safe pick in Thomas? That doesn't make sense. It's not a terrible pick. It's not as bad a pick as we saw later in the draft. And if you put yourself in the mindset of someone who's evaluating the draft the day after it happened, it's not as bad as the Daniel Jones pick. It's a C. It's right position, wrong player. There's no question that the Giants' offensive line looks a lot better today than it did 24 hours ago. Nate Solder, Will Hernandez, probably Nick Gates, Kevin Zeitler, and Andrew Thomas. That's pretty darn good. But it would have looked a lot better with either Tristan Wirfs, Mekhi Becton, or Jedrick Wills Jr. there instead. 5, 6, and 7, I'll rattle through quickly also. Tua Tagovailoa had to be the second quarterback off the board. There's no way that it was going to be Justin Herbert. There was no way it was going to be Jordan Love. For it to have not been Tua would have been criminal. I understand the risk. And I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday who had Tua as the 4th best quarterback in the draft. There's no question that the guy has a lengthy injury history. There's no question that that should raise some red flags. But just watch what he did at Alabama. He was insane. He reminded you so much of Steve Young, it wasn't even funny. This guy starts his Alabama career replacing Jalen Hurts in the national title game and leading the Crimson Tide to victory when no one had ever heard of him. And he continues his dominance all throughout his Alabama career. The Dolphins historically have gone with the quote-unquote safer option. They passed on Drew Brees for Dante Culpepper because of Brees' injury history. They passed on Matt Ryan for Jake Long because Long was the safer pick coming out of college. Where has that gotten them? They're about as far away from a Super Bowl as they've ever been. There's a reason they had to tank for this guy. It's about time they took a risk. Yeah, this can blow up. There's no question. This is without question the riskiest pick in the draft. But if he stays healthy, I don't like the idea of having to face this guy twice a year. Justin Herbert had to be the Chargers pick. We pretty much knew that they were going to take the best remaining quarterback. I saw some people killing the pick because Herbert was a reach. He didn't have a top 10 grade to a lot of people. I mean, look, that's fair. I had him as the 15th best player in this draft. ESPN on their final board had him 24th. Yeah, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone outside of Oregon that had this kid as a legitimate top 10 prospect. But quarterback-needy teams reach. And if you look at the Chargers roster, they had no bigger hole than quarterback. They need to get him some help in the second round, both on the O-line and at wide receiver. And it's going to be interesting to see who starts week 1, Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert. That's a legitimate quarterback competition. It's going to be fun to see what happens. But Justin Herbert had to be the pick. Tom Telesco let Phillip Rivers walk, a franchise icon, because he wanted to set his team up better for the future at the most important position in sports. To pass on Herbert would have been criminal. Derek Brown was the no-brainer pick here. I'm sure Isaiah Simmons was tempting. Matt Rule loves positionless players. But the Panthers had such a huge hole at defensive line with Kawan Short getting hurt and Gerald McCoy leaving in free agency that they had to take a guy who some people had as the best remaining player available. I think that the Giants and Panthers are going to regret passing on Simmons, but Derek Brown is going to be a great player in this league for a long time. I just think Simmons is going to be better. I'm giving the Panthers an A here instead of the A+ that I would have given them for taking Simmons. Having said that, though, the Cardinals are kind of a weird landing spot for him. They needed a safety, and they needed an inside linebacker. There's no question. And Simmons is probably going to play more inside linebacker for him, but they really, really needed offensive line help. There were a lot of games that Kyler Murray was scrambling for his life. And when you make the investment in a quarterback in the first round, your next order of business has to be giving him help, whether it's on the line or at the skill positions. I don't hate the Simmons pick. He was best player available. I thought he was the 4th best player in this draft, so to get him at 8 is a steal. He does fill a need. It's not the biggest need the Cardinals had. I'd have loved Tristan Wirfs for him, but I'm giving this a solid B+. CJ Henderson, I nailed that pick in my mock draft. I'm such a big fan of this kid. Really checks all the boxes you look for as a cornerback. Except he's terrible in run support. Probably one of the worst tackling corners I've ever seen. But I've said this before. I don't want my corners to be good tacklers. Darrelle Revis was a terrible tackler. And he's a future Hall of Famer. I mean, usually if your corners are getting a lot of tackles, that means that they're allowing the catch and then bringing the receiver down. That's not good. Henderson was the perfect fit, fills a huge need in the Jaguars secondary. It's an A+ pick. Someone on the ESPN telecast said that with the Jedrick Wills pick, we can finally properly evaluate Baker Mayfield. And I agree with that notion 100%. He's either going to succeed this year or he's going to fail. There's no excuse for him to be bad. The Browns made some big investments for his future this offseason. First with Jack Conklin, then Austin Hooper, and now Jedrick Wills. And you take a look at that O-line now. Wills, Joel Bitonio, J.C. Treader, Wyatt Teller, and Conklin. That's a fantastic O-line. Teller's the weak link there. There's no question. He's not a great player. But he's playing at a position where he can get help, whether it's from the center or the right tackle. I don't mind Wyatt Teller being there. He won't be too much of a liability. It's put up or shut up time for Baker Mayfield. It's just that simple. So now we go to the Jets, Jets. You know, it's funny. The 7 guys that I listed yesterday morning, 4 of them were still on the board. Wirfs, Becton, Judy, and Lamb. They were in a perfect spot. But my heart was still beating kind of fast. I've seen the Jets in this position before blow it. I remember 2014 when they should have taken Teddy Bridgewater, Darqueze Dennard, or Jason Verrett, and they took Calvin Pryor. But my brain was telling me, Jacob, there's no way they're going to mess this up. Douglas is smarter than Idzik. It's okay if you're not 100% sold on Douglas, but there's no way he's going to mess this up. And he didn't. He took the guy who a lot of people had mocked to him in Becton. I went 6 for 6. in my mock draft to start off with. I mean, I nailed Burrow at 1, Okuda at 3, those were no-brainers. Tua at 5, there was some late buzz that they could have taken Justin Herbert or Jordan Love, but I stuck with Tua. Derek Brown at 7, I'm sure CJ Henderson was tempting. I'm sure Isaiah Simmons was 2. At 9, CJ Henderson, that caught some people by surprise, not me. And Mekhi Becton, a guy who I knew Joe Douglas liked. Joe Douglas loves athletic offensive linemen. And Becton is the best athlete out of all the offensive linemen in this draft. Yes, he's raw. Yes, he doesn't have good footwork. He gets knocked off balance a lot. But I'm telling you, with Fant and Becton as the Jets' offensive tackles, they probably have the best offensive tackle group in the NFL when it comes to athleticism. And that's important in this modern NFL. I do want to talk to Dominic for a minute, and I texted him this last night, but I'll address it here. And this goes to any Jets fan that feels the same way. I saw some people saying this on Jets Twitter. They'd have preferred Tristan Wirfs. This is a bad pick. Blah, blah, blah. No. The fact that Tristan Wirfs was still available and they took Becton doesn't make this a bad pick. This isn't like taking Andrew Thomas. No one had Andrew Thomas ranked ahead of Wirfs, Becton, and Wills. There were people who had Becton ranked ahead of Wirfs. Now, not me. I'd have liked Tristan Wirfs more. I'm not giving this pick an A+. I'm giving it an A. But there's a fallacy that a lot of people fall into called right position, wrong player. It fills a need, there's no question, but the fact that it's not the guy that they wanted means that it's a bad pick. No, that's a perspective thing. Unless it's an egregious reach like Andrew Thomas, you can't hate the pick. This is an A. It's not an A+. Would I have liked Wirfs more? The answer is yes. Do I think Becton is going to make multiple Pro Bowls for the Jets? Yeah, I do. It's put up or shut up time for Sam Darnold. It's just that simple. You want to talk about a bad pick? All you have to do is look at the Raiders. I mean, the Raiders have the worst draft of any team. Period. It's done. It doesn't matter what they do in days 2 and 3. They've already locked up the worst draft label. On what planet is Henry Ruggs better than Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb? Didn't the Raiders learn their lesson when they took Darius Hayward-Bay over Michael Crabtree? Did they need a wide receiver? No question. And Al Davis had to love this pick. He had to be doing backflips. But for goodness sake, you passed on 2 vastly superior prospects for a speedster, a one-trick pony, a guy with blazing speed. No question, he's Ted Ginn. But Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb are so much better. The Las Vegas era of the Raiders franchise isn't off to a good start. Nick texted me that he didn't like that he's going to have to face Ruggs twice a year because the Chiefs don't have speedy corners. Could be worse. Could be facing Jeudy or Lamb. So now we move on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers making one of the best picks of this draft. I mean, they got the best offensive lineman in this draft, in my opinion, at 13. Did they have to trade up to do it? Yeah, I'm sure they'd have rather kept the 117th overall pick. But John Lynch has done that before. He's enticed teams to trade up one pick to make sure they get their guy, cough, cough, Ryan Pace, cough, cough, Mitchell Trubisky. You can't begrudge the Buccaneers for trading up, especially when their window to win is so small. They have to win a Super Bowl in the next 2 years. And Tristan Wirfs gives them the best opportunity to do that. You take a look at that Buccaneers offensive line now with Donovan Smith, Ali Marpet, Ryan Jensen, Alex Kappa, and now Wirfs. Brady could take a nap back there, and he'd be able to find one of Evans, Godwin, or Gronk. Fantastic pick by the Buccaneers. Bruce Arians and Jason Licht had to be doing backflips. By the way, I've been calling Jason Licht Jason Licht. I'm really sorry about that. I'm telling you, everyone should be named John Smith. Okay? It'd make my life so much easier. I feel bad for mispronouncing these people's names, but I mean, what are you gonna do? The best thing you could do is just apologize for it afterwards. And, Light, if you're listening, I'm truly sorry. In trading down, the Niners did something that they've done a lot recently. Take a defensive lineman. And it made literally no sense. Nothing against Javon Kinlaw. I like Kinlaw a lot. I had him as the 12th best player in this draft. Really, really great prospect. You want to tell me if production isn't where it should have been at South Carolina? That's fine. He did take some plays off, but man, I'll tell you, all the tools are there. He reminds me a lot of Myles Garrett. That's not the issue here. The issue is, you take a look at that Niners defensive line. Dee Ford, Eric Armstead, Solomon Thomas, and Nick Bosa. Where are you playing Kinlaw? You want to tell me that you don't want Armstead playing defensive tackle because he doesn't have a lot of experience there? Okay, fine. You have a guy in DJ Jones who actually played really well last year. I understand he got hurt, but he had a 67.8 overall grade last year, according to Pro Football Focus. Granted, limited time, but still, ton of potential. I thought the reason that they traded DeForest Buckner was to clear up that logjam they had at defensive line. Now they're right back at square one. And to make matters worse, they could have had Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb. I know they took Brandon Ayuk, and I'll get into that pick a little later, but they could have had Jerry Jeudy and Trayvon Diggs. Instead, they ended up with Javon Kinlaw and Brandon Ayuk. That's a bad job by John Lynch. They had the second worst draft out of any team. That's already set in stone. Man, I'll tell you, the Broncos had to be doing backflips over these teams' asinine decisions. The Raiders take Ruggs, the Niners take Kinlaw. They get to stand pat at 15 and get the best wide receiver in the draft. Drew Lock throwing it to Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, it doesn't get much better than that. The sky's the limit for Drew Lock. Jeudy was easily the best player available. I knew he was going to slip. I had him 6th on my big board. Nick and I had him going 12. He ended up going 15. I knew he was going to slip. But to slip past 2 wide receiver needy teams is criminal. This guy was by far and away the best wide receiver in this draft. It wasn't CeeDee Lamb. I like Lamb. In any other draft, it would be Lamb. But not Jeudy. A much, much, much better route runner. Played in a more pro-ready system in Alabama. The Broncos get an easy A+. Moving on now to the Atlanta Falcons. They get an F. Was cornerback in need? Yes. And I'm sure they were counting on Javon Kinlaw being there. I don't think anyone saw that coming, that he wasn't going to be there at 16. But the Falcons reached for a guy that I had 52nd on my big board. Nick had him going 22. He ended up going 16. That's an egregious reach. He filled a need. There's no question. But there's nothing worse in the draft than when you reach for a need. You go to your secondary need and then your tertiary need. Look, there was no great pick for the Falcons to make. They got screwed over by the Niners' stupidity. But they responded to that stupidity by committing more stupidity. 2 wrongs don't make a right. The better thing that the Falcons could have done was trade down. And then they could have taken a guy like Ross Blacklock, who I'm stunned fell out of the first round. You want to tell me maturity concerns played a role in that? I'm not so sure about that. Cough, cough, Damon Arnett. I'll get into that in a little bit. There were a lot of Cowboys fans that were really nervous when they saw that Jerry Jones was going to take full control over the Cowboys pick. They got Johnny Manziel flashbacks. Instead, he made the perfect pick. He took the best player available, and it filled a big need for him. You've got Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, Amari Cooper, and Michael Gallup, along with Blake Jarwin, who they really like. You know what they were missing? A slot receiver. It's something they've been missing for a while. And CeeDee Lamb at 6'1.5" fills that role. He fills that role really well. I mean, if you're a fan of the Eagles, the Giants, or Redskins, you had to hate that pick. That was the perfect pick for the Cowboys. Michael Irvin had every right to be doing backflips over it. They could even play Gallup in the slot and have Lamb on the outside. They could alternate between plays. The creativity that Mike McCarthy is going to hopefully show with his new offense is going to be otherworldly. That brings us to the Miami Dolphins, and when you take a quarterback high, like I said before, you need to give him weapons, whether it's on the line or the skill positions. It's just that simple. But they reached egregiously for Austin Jackson. Look, I understand that Jackson had climbed up a lot of people's big boards. Early on, he didn't have a lot of hype, but he snuck his way into the second round conversation. I had him 39th on my board. I didn't see too many people having him go in the top 20. I saw late first round. I didn't see top 20. There's no question that the Dolphins needed offensive line help. But there were better prospects available than Austin Jackson. People like Josh Jones and Ezra Cleveland would have made much more sense. Jones I would have loved. Cleveland I would have tolerated. Jackson I don't like. That pick gets a D- to me. Speaking of bad picks, there's literally nothing worse that the Raiders could have done than to take Damon Arnette. I mean, he didn't fill a need for the Raiders. They had corners. Why didn't they take a guy like Xavier McKinney or Ross Blacklock? Why are you taking a guy with character concerns that high that doesn't fill a need for you? I understand if he fills an egregious need, you take a chance on him. That's fine. But Damon Arnette, I had being available when the Jets picked next at 48. I saw no one have him as a top 20 pick. Late first round, I saw a couple people say that. Most people had him going in the second round. ESPN, as a matter of fact, had him as the 58th best prospect in this draft. He's really short. I mean, I have no idea where he's going to end up playing for the Raiders. They have Trayvon Mullen. They have Nevin Lawson. They can easily bring back Darryl Worley. I don't know why they haven't yet. Terrible, terrible job by Gruden and Mayock. And it's a shame because I really like those guys. The Jaguars really need help everywhere. Namely in the secondary, but they took Henderson high, so they probably didn't want to double dip in the secondary. I would have with Xavier McKinney still being there, but I can't begrudge the Kayvon Chaisson pick. If this guy can shake the injury bug, he has the potential to be a perennial Pro Bowler. It was probably best player available, in their opinion. I can't hate the pick. I'm giving that pick a solid B. There's no question that the Philadelphia Eagles needed a wide receiver. And you can't begrudge them for the Rieger pick too much. You want to tell me they should have taken a Kenneth Murray or a Patrick Queen or a Trayvon Diggs, a Xavier McKinney, a Grant Delpit, and Antoine Winfield? You can. They really needed defensive help. But wide receiver was probably the most glaring need they had. Rieger is going to fit in really well there. He's going to be given an opportunity to contribute right away. But the simple fact is, there were better wide receivers available. T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, Justin Jefferson. Jefferson was probably the best one available. To take Rieger with those guys available, indefensible. The biggest knock on Rieger is he has terrible ball skills. I mean, this guy has probably the worst hands out of any of the big wide receivers in this draft. I'm giving this pick a C. It's right position, wrong player. It's not a bad pick. You can't hate it too much, but there were better wide receivers available. It's very similar to the Giants' pick of Andrew Thomas. The Minnesota Vikings, on the other hand, though, they had to be doing backflips that the Eagles took Rieger. I mean, they needed a running mate with Adam Thielen. They traded Stephon Diggs, and now you get to pair Thielen with Jefferson? That's a home run. Kirk Cousins had to be doing backflips over that. Jefferson's a guy who, even though he was playing in a stacked LSU offense, still put up over 1,500 yards, over 100 catches, and 18 touchdowns. I mean, that's unreal. In any other draft, he would have been right up there with Judy and Lamb in terms of best wide receiver available. But because this was such a stacked wide receiver draft class, you knew he was going to slip a little bit. ESPN had him as the 14th best player in this draft. For the Vikings to take him at 22 was a home run. They get an easy A+ grade. The Chargers made a very confusing move at 23. When they traded up, and by the way, no shocker that the Patriots traded down. I mean, there's still something right in this world when Bill Belichick trades down. There's still some semblance of normalcy in these crazy times. Thank God that Belichick traded down, or else I thought we were going to see Rod Serling at some point. But when the Chargers traded up, I actually thought they were going to go after Josh Jones or Ezra Cleveland or even Brandon Ayuk when it made sense. Instead, they took Kenneth Murray. Look, it's nothing against Murray. I like Murray a lot, actually. Great run defender, great overall football skills, really, really good tackler. But he doesn't feel a need for the Chargers. Why would the Chargers trade up for a guy that they don't need? They have Kazir White, who I like a lot, played well for him last year. Now, I understand that he only played 372 snaps last year. This is from Pro Football Focus. He's only played 514 snaps in his 2 years in the league. I get that. But in those snaps, he's never had a Pro Football Focus grade worse than 65. He's a good player, has a ton of potential. I'd have rather the Chargers just rolled with him. And quite honestly, I didn't think they should have traded up at all. Overall, I'm giving that pick a grade of, let's say, B-. I'm in a good mood today. Generous grader. I want my teachers to be generous graders to me. I'll do the same. Remember how I said yesterday that teams in need of centers reach for him? Well, that's what happened with Cesar Ruiz. ESPN had him as the 37th best player in this draft. I was a little meaner. I had him at 47. He went 24 to the Saints. That's bad enough, but the Saints didn't need offensive line help. You take a look at that O-line, Eric McCoy, Larry Warford, and they just signed Andrus Peat to a big money deal. Where are they playing Ruiz? That makes no sense to me. A terrible pick by the Saints. Quite honestly, I'm giving that pick an F. There were plenty of different routes that they could have gone with that pick. They could have taken Jacob Eason, they could have taken Jordan Love, Brandon Ayuk, Trayvon Diggs. Instead, they take a guy who I had as a second-round talent. I think everyone had him as a second-round talent. And he doesn't even feel a need for him. It's a joke. An absolute joke. The Niners traded up with the Vikings for the right to pick Brandon Ayuk. Look, that's a good pick. Ayuk fills a huge need for the Niners, and he may not have gotten to him at 31. I don't begrudge that pick at all. That's probably an A-plus pick right there. But the simple fact is, the Niners did not use their draft capital as well as they should have. They traded down for just a 4th round pick. Then they traded up using the pick that they got from the trade down and a 5th round pick. So the net loss is -1. This is a team that's hemorrhaging draft picks. They need an infusion of young talent. Again, nothing against Ayuk. I like him a lot. I think he's going to do really well in San Francisco. But they could have just taken Jerry Jeudy and Trayvon Diggs. Instead, they took Javon Kinlaw, and they had to trade up for Brandon Ayuk. Bad job by John Lynch. I may be harsh in saying that it was the second worst draft of any team. Maybe another team can overtake him, but I don't see it. That's not a good use of draft capital. The 26th pick is when the draft got turned on its head. I don't think anyone saw the Packers doing what they did. Do they need a quarterback of the future? It couldn't hurt. They have a glaring need at wide receiver, though. And with Ayuk going with the pick just before the pick that the Packers traded up for, I think everyone was wondering, wait a minute, what's going on in Green Bay? This is a panic move. I don't like this. They're going to reach for someone. I mean, T. Higgins wouldn't have been terrible, but he could have been there at 30. Patrick Queen would have made sense. Trayvon Diggs would have made sense. They had many more pressing needs than quarterback of the future. But they traded up for Jordan Love. The stunner of all stunners. Do I think it's a reach for Jordan Love? On a personal level, yes, I had him as the 57th best prospect in this draft. So to take him at 26 is a reach. But Teddy Bridgewater got traded up for by the Vikings. Johnny Manziel got traded up for by the Browns. Brandon Whedon got traded up for by the Browns. Lamar Jackson got traded up for with the Ravens. When you see these guys that you have first-round grades on sliding in the draft, especially when they're quarterbacks, you're going to look to strike. And it's a fair bet that the Packers faced competition for teams looking to trade up for Love. I'm sure Belichick wanted him. I'm sure that the Colts wanted him. The Panthers would have made sense. The Jaguars would have made sense. But evidently, the Packers made the best offer. I mean, all the Dolphins had to do was fall back 4 spots. And they picked up an extra 4th round pick. That's not bad. This isn't the right pick for now for the Packers. And look, the Packers have done a terrible job throughout Aaron Rodgers' career of putting him in the best position possible to win Super Bowls. And that's going to continue. But there's still wide receiver talent in this draft all throughout. I've been saying it for months. The Packers still have their 2nd and 3rd round picks. There's nothing stopping them from taking wide receivers with those picks. And they can get their quarterback of the future also? Great! I mean, now Eli Manning knows what it feels like to be the old guy forced out of his starting job. Aaron Rodgers did it to Brett Favre. He's going to feel the same way that Eli felt last year. Now, it's not going to happen anytime soon. This is going to take a couple years to develop. And you're going to hear Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love trade rumors just like you heard Brett Favre trade rumors all throughout Rodgers' early seasons in the league. But make no mistake about it, this is not a bad decision by the Packers. As it stands right now, this is a B move. I had Eason ahead of Love, so my grade is being driven down by that. But if the Packers take wide receivers in the second and third round, this grade will go up to an A-, maybe even an A, depending on who they take. The Seattle Seahawks made the worst pick of this draft. In terms of need, in terms of talent, in terms of pretty much everything. They're pushing for that second worst draft label. They're nipping at the Niners' heels. I gotta be honest with you. When Jordan Brooks was taken, I had to look at my notes. Who is this guy? ESPN had him ranked as the 92nd best prospect in this draft. I had a late third round grade on him too. He's a fantastic tackler. There's no question. But the Seahawks don't need help at inside linebacker. If you put him on the edge, he's not going to be as good. His strength is tackling. You're going to lose that. Why didn't the Seahawks just take Patrick Queen? That would have made so much more sense. I understand that when you're a great team, you have the luxury of reaching for guys that you really want. But this is a solid D to me. That's what she said. Speaking of Patrick Queen, you gotta love the fit of him with the Ravens. He continues in the mold of great Ravens defenders. I'm kind of scared to see what he can do in Wink Martindale's defense. He's great against the run. He's a 3-down linebacker. Played great in the championship game. I think the Ravens hit a home run with that pick. I really, really do. Isaiah Wilson, I totally forgot about this when I was talking about him yesterday. Actually went to my father's high school, Poly Prep, in Brooklyn. And he was recruited to Georgia. That's pretty darn good. Look, Wilson's a guy who I had a low second round grade on, but I knew that I was in the minority there. He's a jack of all trades, master of none. He has a very low ceiling, but a very high floor. Ryan Tannehill is going to need help with protection. So is Derrick Henry. I didn't think they needed another offensive lineman. I'm not sure where he's going to play. I know they lost Conklin, but I like Dennis Kelly. I thought Kelly was going to slide into Conklin's old spot. If not, then Kelly becomes a very intriguing trade target for teams that missed out on offensive linemen. Noah Igbenogany, I had a third round grade on. I thought that was a really bad pick by the Dolphins. They needed safeties more than they needed corners. They spent a bunch of money on Byron Jones. They signed Xavier Howard to a big extension. Did they need a nickel corner? Yes. But with Xavier McKinney sitting there, you've got to fill your bigger need. Like I said, I had a third round grade on Igbenogany. there were some people that had a second round grade on him. And look, I understand that it may not be the most egregious of reaches, especially when you factor in the fact that they traded down and still got him, but they did not do a great job with their last 2 picks in the first round. I like Igbenogany. He just has bad ball skills. That's it. Freak athlete, though. Both his parents were Olympians for Nigeria. Jeff Gladney made a lot more sense to me. The Vikings needed cornerback help. I had him as the 46th best prospect in this draft. ESPN had him as the 43rd best prospect. So it's not an egregious reach. And when you factor in the fact that they traded down to get him, it's not that bad. See, the thing with Gladney is he had a sore knee which prevented him from going to the Senior Bowl. That knocked him down some teams' boards. It knocked him down my board a little bit. He's a jack of all trades, master of none. He doesn't have good hands. But I don't mind that. Darrelle Revis didn't get a lot of interceptions. If you're just swatting the ball down, I really don't mind it too much. I like the pick of Gladney. I don't love it. I'm going to give it a B. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a stunner to me. Did the Chiefs need running back help? Yes. No question. But with DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, and Jonathan Taylor still sitting there, that's right position, wrong player. I'm taller than Edwards-Helaire. He's only 5'7", I'm 5'9", and Damian Williams isn't a big guy either. You want to tell me he reminds you of Brian Westbrook? Which is what Andy Reid and Brett Veach said? I wouldn't go that far. Westbrook is taller than Edwards-Helaire, not by much, but still he's taller. He'll do fine for the Chiefs. It's right position, wrong player. You can't hate the pick if you're a Chiefs fan. Nick liked it. I don't love it. I'm going to give it a B-. On Monday morning, you're going to get a New York Jets draft recap where I'm going to go through all their picks. I don't know what I'm going to do for the regular episode of the Jacob Valk Show. Maybe there will be some crazy trades. Maybe there will be some crazy picks. I'm going to leave you in suspense. How does that sound? Until Monday, I am Jacob Valk saying, shout out to you, Bart Johnson.